The teacher's name had been Isabel once. In another county, in a schoolhouse with a tin roof that clattered like shot in the rain. Her lessons had been soft-spoken, and her hands smelled faintly of chalk and wintergreen. But that was before the famine crept through like a dust-slicked thief, and before the county writs stripped her pay, shuttered the school, and called it God's will. She wandered after that, thinner each month. Carried the Bible she'd used in lessons, though her faith had frayed at the same edges as her skirts. Winter turned her bones into piano wires. By spring, she had no strength left to beg, and no town left to take her in. The last one, Ross Hollow, offered her shelter in a shed behind the mill house, but the mill burned. Folks scattered. They left her in the ash. That was where he found her. He was a tall man with a limp and a rifle he never let leave his side. His name was Harlan, and he wasn't from anywhere anymore. Not since the war, and not since the gallows failed to take him in Missouri. He moved like a man who'd learned to be still. That day, his boots cracked the frost as he stepped into the hushed ruin of Ross Hollow. He wasn't looking for anything but silence. What he found instead was a body wrapped in rags, fingers blackened, lips split. She might have been dead, and he nearly left her that way. But her eyes opened, not wide, not even fully. Just enough to remind him of a girl he'd seen shot through the lung at Fort Donelson, the breath bubbling up from a wound too deep to save. He hated that memory, hated how it clung to his ribs. Maybe that was why he dragged her from the cinders, carried her like driftwood in the crook of his arm. Found a shed, whole but barely on the edge of the hollow, and laid her there with the carefulness of someone who hadn't touched another soul in years. For 3 days she didn't speak. He fed her what little he had, dried venison, potato peel steeped in water, the last crusts of bread wrapped in oilskin, and watched her hands tremble with each mouthful. Her voice came back slow. "Broken things always did. You should have left me," she said. He didn't answer. She tried to sit once, fell, cursed at herself in a whisper. By the 5th day she asked him his name. He didn't give it. By the 7th, she said, "I was a teacher once." He nodded, rolled another cigarette, watched her try to hold the heat of the fire in her ruined hands. She didn't ask more questions. The silence between them turned into something useful. He hunted, she rested. At night he'd return and find her curled near the embers, eyes sharp, watching him like a feral dog watches a stranger, hopeful but waiting for pain. It wasn't until the 12th day that the men came. 3 of them, riders from New Chapel, looking for anything left behind in Ross Hollow. When they found the fire still warm and saw Harlan standing between them and the woman in the shed, they laughed. "She yours?" one of them asked, grin showing brown teeth. "She's nothing," another said. "Look at her." But they still reached for her. Something in the way she tried to hide behind Harlan must have sparked some ancient cruelty in them. One grabbed her arm. She screamed, not loud, but sharp and wounded. That was when Harlan moved. He didn't speak, just stepped forward and drove the butt of his rifle into the man's mouth. Another reached for his revolver, but Harlan shot first. The third tried to run, but didn't get far. Harlan walked him down slow, like a man thrashing wheat. When it was done, blood steamed in the frost. Isabel didn't move for a long time. "You didn't have to do that," she said, voice shaking. Harlan looked at her, face unreadable. "Yes, I did." She stared at the bodies, at the rifle, at him. Then she nodded. From that day forward, she didn't speak of dying again. Snow thawed in patches along the hills as they left Ross Hollow behind. Harlan didn't ask if she wanted to go. He just packed the last of their food, cinched the saddle, and waited while she laced up her broken shoes. Her legs trembled with each step, but she followed. That was enough. They moved west, avoiding towns, keeping to the tree lines and narrow hollows where no patrols rode and no travelers passed. Harlan hunted. Isabel mended their things with threads pulled from her own hem. She learned to gut rabbits with a knife too dull for the job, fingers numb but steady. Some nights they didn't speak at all. Others she asked questions he didn't want to answer. What happened to your leg? He ignored her. Did you have people? A wife. He lit a cigarette. You ever kill a man before those three? That time he looked at her, coldly. Yes. She didn't ask again. By the time they reached burnt timber, she no longer looked like a corpse. She moved stiff, still too thin, but her eyes didn't drift anymore. They sharpened. She wore one of Harlan's old shirts belted at the waist and wrapped a scarf around her neck to hide the collarbones that jutted like iron stakes. The town was small, barely more than a church and 2 saloons, but Harlan needed ammunition, and Isabel wanted to find a book. Something to remind her of letters and children and days that didn't end in blood. They entered separately. Harlan went to the general store. Isabel stepped into the chapel. Inside, the air was musty with old psalms. A man in preacher's garb looked up as she entered, startled, then smiled as though salvation had arrived. She flinched. Smiles no longer meant safety, but she let him speak. He asked her name. She gave only Issa. He offered food. She took none. He asked where she was bound. Nowhere, she said. He pressed her with words like shelter and purpose. His eyes lingered too long. When she left, her hands were clenched tight at her sides. She found Harlan outside the store, strapping down supplies. He glanced at her face. What happened? Just talk, she muttered. The kind that leaves bruises, if you let it. That night they camped beneath an overhang of rock, fire low, wind sharp off the ridge. She pulled the book she'd stolen from the chapel out of her pack. Psalms again. She opened it not to pray but to read aloud. My soul is among lions, she said. I lie among them that are set on fire. Harlan stared into the flames. Sounds about right. 2 nights later, they were ambushed. A boy, maybe 16, face smeared with dirt, teeth chattering from the cold, held a rusted pistol in both hands. He stepped out from the pines and said, "Drop your bags." Harlan didn't blink. The boy's hands trembled. "I'll shoot." "I will." Isabel stepped between them. "Don't," she said, not to Harlan but to the boy. He stared at her, her face, the hollowness of her cheeks. He lowered the pistol. It clattered to the ground. They fed him, learned his name, Tommy. Said he'd lost his brothers to fever and the rest to conscription. He tried to sleep that night but cried instead, quiet but not quiet enough. Isabel sat with him, stroking his filthy hair. Her hands had never held children of her own, but they remembered the way. In the morning he was gone, so was half their food. Harlan cursed him. Isabel only shook her head. He left the pistol, she said. That counts for something. Harlan muttered about kindness and bullets, but she saw the way he'd packed the boy an extra blanket. They kept moving. The land opened wider the further west they went, scrub plains and skeletal trees and rivers choked with silt. They crossed a place where cattle bones littered the ground like teeth. Some nights Isabel dreamed of fire. Some nights she didn't sleep at all. A week later they found the trail of men again, not riders this time. Foot tracks, too many to count, moving fast and rough. Harlan studied them in silence, jaw set hard. "Raiders?" she asked. He didn't answer, just loaded his rifle. They followed the tracks east into a burned-out mining town. The buildings were hollowed, walls collapsed, snow seeping in like ash. In the square they found a girl, dead, no older than 12, rope burns around her neck, dress torn, eyes open. Isabel didn't scream. She walked back to the edge of town and vomited. That night she didn't speak at all. Harlan buried the girl himself. In the morning, Isabel took his knife without asking and cut her hair short, not for vanity, for war. She looked at him then, eyes steel. "If we find the men who did that," she said, "I want to be there when it ends." He nodded once. They moved faster after that. Wind battered the canyon floor as they crossed into Wyoming territory, a no-man's stretch riddled with old gold trails and fresh graves. No maps marked it now. Harlan moved with purpose, as if something in the boot prints he'd seen back in the mining town had unlocked a memory. He didn't share what. Isabel didn't ask. She understood the way grief walked inside a man, quiet, stiff-backed, never turning its head. They spent 3 days skirting a caravan road where federal riders sometimes passed, dragging shackled men eastward. Isabel watched their shadows cross the ridges and felt something knotted and dark twist inside her. She'd begun carrying a revolver. Harlan had shown her how to clean it, how to fire into a tree trunk until her wrist ached and her ears rang like bells. She was better than most men he'd known in uniform, not faster but colder, precise. One morning she stitched a pocket into the inside of her coat, right over the heart. "For the book," she said. He glanced at the psalms tucked under her arm. "Still think it's got answers?" "No," she said, "but it remembers the questions." The trail they followed turned meaner, tracks more scattered. Blood droplets here and there, and once the remains of a wagon burned down to axles. Buzzards circled. The stench crawled into the back of her throat. They found no bodies, just rope, just drag marks. That night Harlan confessed the name of one of the men he thought they were tracking. "Keene," he said, "used to ride under a different name. Carter's battalion, Arkansas border, ran scouts, did worse after. Deserted like the rest." "You knew him." "I saw him hang a boy with my own belt," he said. "Watched him laugh while he did it." Isabel sat still. The wind outside the linta howled like it remembered that boy. "You think he's lighting them?" "He's the kind who always ends up in charge of something rotten." The next day they caught up with the edge of it, a settlement ash veil carved into the foot of the basin. Dozen cabins, smoke curling. Looked quiet from a distance. Harlan watched it through the long lens of his rifle. Isabel watched him. "What do you see?" she asked. "Nothing moving," he said. "Which is wrong." They circled wide, dropped into the basin after dusk. Found the cabins stripped, doors kicked in. Blood smeared against hearthstones, against cradles. No bodies, no children, but in the largest house something waited, a man tied to a chair. Alive barely, nails gone, tongue cut. Isabel dropped to her knees. "We need to help him." "He's past that," Harlan said. But she took his hand anyway, fed him water. He blinked once, tried to speak, couldn't. Then his eyes widened, fixed on something past them, and his body shook. The back wall had been painted in blood, a symbol there, a crude wheel with spokes like a sun twisted into blades. Beneath it, a word, scorched into the wood. "Vindicta." Isabel stared. "They have a name," she whispered. Harlan nodded. "A creed, too. That's Roman, Latin." She traced the letters, felt them burn. Outside, hoofbeats. They fled into the trees, breath tight. The riders came through less than an hour later. 7 of them, faces wrapped in bandanas. Each bore the symbol on their shoulders, seared into leather. Isabel didn't speak. She watched them pass, watched the leader's eyes scan the trees like he could smell her fury. After they vanished into the north, she turned to Harlan. "We hunt them now." He didn't disagree. She made herself a pact that night. No graves for them, no prayers, only fire, only blood. They moved under moonlight, following the riders northward through shale gullies and wind-beaten mesas. The earth was dry here, every step a whisper of dust. Each night they found traces. Coals still warm, broken branches, scraps of laughter carried faint and cruel on the breeze. Isabel kept count of their supplies. Harlan counted the men. "They've taken prisoners," he said one night, low-voiced, back against a rock face as they watched smoke curl from a distant camp. "Women, maybe more." She didn't ask how he knew. The firelight below flickered like it licked something living. They waited until dawn, watched the camp break. Riders spread out like wolves, searching. Two remained behind to guard whatever lay beneath the canvas tarpaulins slung between pines. That was the first strike. Isabel came in from the east, walking upright, hands empty, face blank. One guard stepped forward, leering. The other lifted his rifle. That was when Harlan fired, one shot. The one with the rifle folded backward like a dropped marionette. The other turned, too slow, and Isabel had the knife out before his mouth formed a curse. She didn't stop until her breath came in shudders and her hand was slick. They found 3 women under the tarp, one unconscious, one dead, one staring, wide-eyed and silent. The staring one spoke only 2 words. "They're splitting." Isabel took her coat off and wrapped it around her. Harlan checked the map. "They're branching west, toward the river." "They're running," Isabel said. "No," he said, "they're gathering." 2 days later, they saw the full camp. Tents, fires, pickets, guards, nearly 30 men, not all rode under the same brand. Some were mercenaries, some deserters. All wore the symbol somewhere, on belts, on gloves. Some had it cut into their skin. The man leading them stood tall and broad, a wolf fur cloak over his shoulders. Harlan's jaw tightened as he passed the glass to Isabel. "That's Keen." She watched him move, issuing orders, striking one man with a whip for some unseen slight. He smiled after, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. She memorized every line of his face. "We can't hit them like this," Harlan said. "We wait, we bleed them from the edges." But Isabel shook her head. "Let me go in." He stared at her. "You want to die." "I want to see what they fear. I want to walk among them." "You think they won't know." "I've been forgotten before. I know how to make myself nothing." She left before he could stop her. Changed into scavenged clothes, rolled in ash, bound her hair, walked into the camp like another runaway looking for safety. No one stopped her. They were used to women crawling to their fire, starved, broken, eyes down. She walked with her shoulders rounded, lips bloodied by her own teeth. When a guard asked her name, she gave a whimper. That was enough. Inside, she saw the truth. They weren't just raiders. They were building something. Orders were written, camps regimented. Keen held sermons at dusk, reading not from scripture but from a ragged black book that bore the same twisted wheel on its cover. "Vindicta," he told them, means vengeance, not justice. Justice is a chain around a strong man's throat. We broke ours. We'll break theirs. Every town that turned us out, every law that starved our children, we burn it all. They roared. They chanted the word back to him. Isabel left that night, slipping into the trees the way she'd come. Harlan waited in the ridge's shadow. His face was thunder when he saw her. "You could have been killed." "I was already dead," she said. "But I know how to kill them now." She didn't wait for permission. That night she and Harlan took down a picket patrol, 2 men, quiet, clean. She kept the book one carried, a smaller version of Keen, with scrawled notes, camp routes, supply stops. The next 2 weeks turned red. They ambushed supply trains, poisoned the stream below the eastern camp, freed 3 more prisoners. One was a boy no older than 10, fingers missing from frost, who clung to Isabel like a shadow. She named him Finch. He never spoke. Keen's camp grew thinner. His men whispered about ghosts, about the teacher with dead eyes. By the time snow returned, Isabel had carved 7 tally marks into the back of her belt. One for each of the men who didn't see her coming. One for each of the pieces of herself she'd buried beside them. By midwinter, the ground was too hard to bury the bodies. They left them instead, arranged by Isabel's hand in a circle near the last burned-out way station. Each one marked with the twisted wheel carved into the dirt beside it, turned backward. A warning, a challenge. Keen's men started to fracture. Some drifted south in the night, packs light, horses drawn tight with fear. Others drank deeper, clung harder to Keen's fury, like it might hold back whatever ghost they believed hunted them now. And still, at the heart of it, the preacher leader spoke of fire and blood, and the old world crumbling so a new one could rise. Isabel listened from the ridge one night. The stolen scope Harlan had traded a cartridge belt for pressed to her eye. She watched Keen speak to his men around the fire, flames dancing off his coat, his arms lifted high. "This world forgot us," he said, "but we will remind it." He spoke as if pain were holy, as if cruelty could be baptized. She turned the scope away before the rage in her stomach sickened her. She and Harlan moved with grim rhythm. Finch followed them like a shadow, learned without asking. Harlan showed him how to load, how to find warmth in a blizzard, how to strike before words ever started. Isabel showed him how to wait, how to listen to the weight of silence in a man's footfall, how to read danger in the way someone's breath caught. They didn't talk about vengeance in front of the boy. They just taught him the tools of it. One night, while they waited for a rider to pass beneath the gulch trail, Harlan asked her a question for the first time since Ross Hollow. "Why teach?" She looked down at the valley below, where torchlight from the caravan shimmered. "I believed in building things that lasted," she said. "Words, understanding, a spine that didn't need to crack others to stand. And now—" She didn't answer. The rider passed. Harlan took him clean through the neck. They stripped his supplies, burned the horse's brand from the hide. Finch found a rolled map tucked in the man's coat. It bore the full markings of Keen's movements, fortifications, plans to raid a depot north of the old fort at Kestrel Point. It was more than intelligence, it was opportunity. "We hit him there," Isabel said. "We don't have numbers." "We don't need numbers, we have knowledge, we have fire." They found the depot 2 days ahead of Keen's men. It was abandoned, but intact. Old government supply crates, some ammunition, rusted tools. A few barrels of kerosene still sealed. They worked through the night. Harlan dug trenches. Isabel rigged tripwires. Finch placed mirrors in trees and covered them in soot to mark the angles of approach. When the riders came, it was like watching a house of cards fall into a stream. The first explosion took the light horse. Then fire spilled from the barricade, touched off by a lantern she'd hung high and shattered with a single shot. Men screamed. Horses bucked and fled. Those who made it inside the yard were choked by smoke, by the fury of a place that had become a crucible. Keen survived. Isabel knew it the moment she didn't see his body among the wreckage. He'd fled northeast, left his men to burn, left everything but the black book and the coat. That night, they buried the ones they'd had to shoot cleanly. The others they left. Vultures came before dawn. Finch slept in a pile of blankets against the depot wall, his thin chest rising and falling slow. Harlan smoked a cigarette and stared into the dead fire. Isabel sat beside him, blood crusted on her sleeve, coat singed at the hem. "He's running now," she said. "He'll regroup." "Let him. I want him to know I'm coming." Harlan looked at her, eyes narrow. "You sure you want to live after this?" She didn't answer for a long time. Then, "I want to see the look in his eyes when it ends." Harlan nodded. "Then we keep going." Keen's trail led into the high country, where the wind scraped the rocks bare and no birds called. He was shedding men like old skin. The few who stayed loyal had faces hard as hammerheads, killers drawn to whatever dark gravity he still held, but it was thinning. And Isabel knew something he didn't. She wasn't thinning. She was sharpening. They found the remnants of a camp beneath a cliffside scarred with soot and old bullet holes. Ash in the fire ring was still warm. Finch found a scarf he recognized, one worn by the girl they'd tried and failed to save back in the basin. He didn't speak, just handed it to Isabel and walked away. She burned it, eyes wet, mouth set. "They're moving fast," Harlan said, "trying to reach the railway junction." he'll want a last stand. A strike that can be remembered. Then we make it his last memory. They moved faster. Snow turned to sleet. The rivers rose. Food thinned. Finch grew quiet, then feverish, then hollow. Isabel carried him for half a day when he could no longer walk, her body brittle with fatigue, but unwilling to set him down. Harlan found a cabin, old, broken, leaning against the mountainside like it had lost its will to stand. But the roof held. They sheltered there 3 nights. Harlan hunted. Isabel boiled snow. Finch didn't speak until the 3rd morning. "Will it stop?" he asked, voice barely more than air. She looked at him, brushed the hair from his sweat-soaked brow. "Yes," she said, "because we won't let it continue." He closed his eyes. When he slept, she whispered to Harlan, "If we fall, he has no one." "Then we don't fall." She looked at him, "Promise me." He didn't, he just loaded his rifle. They moved again on the 4th day. Keen's trail led through old canyon paths once used by miners and scouts, twisting, narrow, designed to trap. They avoided the choke points, crossed above instead, moving with care. Once Harlan slipped and tore a gash along his arm. Isabel stitched it while he gritted his teeth against a stick. Neither spoke. When they reached the junction ridge, they saw it. Keen's final camp perched along the tracks like a boil waiting to burst. 30 men, maybe less, barricades, fires, a telegraph pole stripped of wires, a train schedule posted, nailed to a tree. He meant to take the next supply line. Meant to vanish into the mountains beyond with hostages, food, and enough blood on his hands to drown a town. Isabel watched through the scope, scanning faces, counting weapons. He brought everyone left. He's betting no one will follow. He forgot what I learned, she said. What's that? She pulled the revolver from her coat, checked the cylinder. That nothing makes a person stronger than being discarded. That night they planted charges beneath the ridge. Finch helped dig the pits. He didn't flinch when his fingers bled. At dawn, the train whistle echoed low through the canyon. Keen's men scrambled, positions taken, guns ready. The world braced. That was when the ridge lit up. Fire fell from above. Harlan triggered the first charge. The barricade split. Men scattered, shouting. Then Isabel rose from the brush, stepped into the clearing below, and fired into the nearest guard without breaking stride. They fought like ghosts made flesh. Harlan took the tower. Finch, trembling but steady, lit the final oil trap. Isabel moved through smoke and screams like a reaper in a schoolteacher's bones. She found Keen near the engine, blood on his sleeve, knife drawn. He turned and saw her, and smiled. "Well," he said, "the little ghost returns." She didn't reply. "You think vengeance is enough?" he asked. "You think bleeding me dry fixes the world?" She raised the pistol. "No," she said. "But it ends your part in it." He moved fast, knife out, but she was faster. 2 shots, one through the shoulder, one through the throat. He dropped, gurgling. She stood over him, watched the light fade. "You remember Ross Hollow?" she asked. His mouth opened, closed. She knelt, took the book from his coat, tore it in half, threw it into the fire. The snow began again. This time she let it fall. Smoke lingered long after the fire died, clinging to the ruined track yard like a shroud. The snow melted where blood soaked the ground, and silence returned, not the fearful hush of hiding, but something deeper. A silence of completion, of aftermath. Harlan found Isabel standing where Keen had fallen. She hadn't moved since. Her coat fluttered at the edges, scorched and wet, but her stance held. A monument carved from the same stone the mountain grew from. He stepped beside her, rifle low. "It's done," he said. She didn't answer. Finch sat near the rails, legs drawn in, eyes on the cooling engine. He hadn't spoken since the flames took the last of Keen's followers, some running into the hills, some swallowed by the explosion at the south barricade. He held a tin mug Harlan had pressed into his hands but hadn't drunk from it. Isabel knelt, slow, took the mug gently, looked at the boy. "You're safe now," she said. He blinked. She reached into her coat, drew out the blackened remnants of the Psalms, half-burned, pages curled. The only thing left of the world she'd once tried to build. She handed it to him. "Words still matter," she said. "You'll write your own." His lip trembled, but he held the book tight. They stayed 2 nights at the junction, burying the bodies that hadn't burned too badly, collecting what ammunition remained. Harlan carved markers with the blunt edge of a bayonet. He didn't mark Keene's grave. "Not all things deserve a name," he said. On the third morning they left, no destination, no plan, just forward. They crossed through forest, snow thinning into needles and gravel. Finch grew stronger each day, eyes more alert. He asked questions, not about the dead, about the sky, about how wolves moved, about how far the ocean might be, and whether it was true that it had no edge. Isabel let him talk. Harlan found a cabin near the ridge of the divide, not much more than timber bones and a roof held up by spite, but it stood. They cleaned it, fletched arrows, hung venison to dry. One night Isabel sat outside, book in her lap. Finch slept by the fire. Harlan carved a length of wood into something shapeless. "You staying?" he asked. She looked out at the trees. They didn't whisper now, they just stood. Winter not done. "No," he said, "but the worst of it is." She closed the book. "I was nothing when you found me." He didn't look up. "No. You were waiting." "For what?" "For the part of you that fights back." She nodded, slow. Wind moved her hair, short now, streaked with ash she hadn't fully washed out. "You think peace is possible." He shrugged. "For some. Not always for the ones who earned it. And for us." He didn't speak. She watched the stars rise above the timberline. Then, "We keep going." That night she dreamed of the schoolhouse, of children with clean hands and steady voices, of chalk on her fingers and the sound of pages turning. But when she woke, it was the crackle of fire and the creak of pine that greeted her, and Finch whispering a line from a book he could barely read. "My soul is among lions." She smiled, tired and whole. It wasn't the same as healing, but it was something close to surviving, and she would take it.